The crystal pitcher caught the light of the chandelier as it rose. For a single second, it was almost beautiful. The way the ice water arced through the air above that elegant Beverly Hills banquet hall, above the white roses and the fine china and the 60 people in black tie who had come to celebrate one of Hollywood's greatest evenings. Then it fell. And it fell directly onto Audrey Hepburn. She did not scream. She did not move. The water hit her all at once, cold, sudden, merciless, soaking her black dress, running through her dark hair, dripping from her chin onto the white tablecloth beneath her. The chandelier above shimmered. The room went absolutely silent. 60 of Hollywood's most powerful people sat frozen in their chairs, glasses halfway to their lips, conversations dying mid-word, every eye locked on the same impossible sight. Richard Harlan Voss set the pitcher down with a soft click. He was 58 years old, broad-shouldered, a senior production executive whose name appeared on contracts that could make or destroy a career with a single signature. He had been drinking since 7 o'clock. He looked down at Audrey with a thin smile and said quietly, so that only those closest to him could hear, "That's what you are, sweetheart. A pretty little prop. Don't forget who made you." For a moment, no one moved. Audrey Hepburn sat perfectly still. Water ran down her face in thin rivulets. Her hands were flat on the table, unmoving. She stared straight ahead at nothing, her expression carefully, almost painfully composed, as if she had trained herself for this exact moment, as if she had known, somewhere deep and private, that a night like this was always going to come. She did not cry. She did not flinch. She simply sat there, soaking wet, in the middle of a room full of people who were doing absolutely nothing. At the far end of the table, Gregory Peck had set down his fork. He was 37 years old, already one of the biggest names in Hollywood, a man whose quiet seriousness had earned him a reputation that most actors spent entire careers reaching for. He had not said a word. He had not stood up. Not yet. But his jaw was tight, and his eyes were fixed on Richard Voss, with the kind of stillness that is not calm at all. It is the opposite of calm. It is a man deciding something. Stay with us, because what Gregory Peck decided in the next 60 seconds changed the lives of everyone in that room. And the story of what really happened that night in Beverly Hills in March of 1954 was kept quiet for 30 years. But that moment didn't start there. To understand what happened at that dinner table, you have to understand the world that built it, and the two people who were about to collide inside it. Hollywood in 1954 was not a place. It was a system, and like every system built on power, it had rules. Unwritten, unspoken, and enforced with the kind of quiet brutality that left no marks and no witnesses. The studios owned everything. They owned the sets and the cameras and the distribution chains that stretched from California to every cinema in America. But more than that, they owned the people. Actors signed contracts that dictated what they wore, where they lived, who they were seen with in public, and what they were allowed to say in interviews. Careers were not built in Hollywood, they were granted. And what was granted could be taken back without warning and without explanation. Richard Harlan Voss had spent 23 years learning exactly how that system worked. He had started as a junior acquisitions reader in 1931 and had climbed, methodically and without sentiment, to a position where a single phone call from him could open doors or seal them permanently. He was not the loudest man in any room. He did not need to be. Power that loud tends to announce itself because it is uncertain. Voss's power was the quiet kind. The kind that did not need to raise its voice because everyone in the room already knew the consequences of ignoring it. In the previous 2 years alone, he had ended 3 careers. A director who had questioned his notes publicly on a studio lot. A leading man who had turned down a project Voss personally championed. A costume designer who had made the mistake of going to a producer above him with a complaint. All 3 were gone from Hollywood within 6 months. None of them ever spoke about why. Audrey Hepburn had arrived in this world as something it did not know how to categorize. She was 24 years old, British by upbringing, Belgian by birth, shaped not by studio grooming or Hollywood ambition, but by something harder and quieter. A childhood lived under Nazi occupation in the Netherlands, years of near starvation, the discipline of serious ballet training that had taught her to hold herself together when everything inside was falling apart. She had not been discovered by a studio, she had not been manufactured. She had simply appeared, fully formed, and won the Academy Award for Best Actress for Roman Holiday, a film Voss had nothing to do with. That was the problem. He could not control what he had not created. Gregory Peck had been watching Voss for years. He knew exactly what kind of man he was. And tonight, seated 6 chairs away at the same long table, he was about to find out what kind of man he himself was prepared to be. The dinner had been Voss's idea. He had framed it as a celebration, a formal welcome for Audrey Hepburn into the inner circle of Hollywood society. The kind of evening where the right people sat at the same table and agreements were made without ever being spoken aloud. 60 guests, the finest private dining room at the Beverly Hills Hotel. White roses flown in from San Francisco, a menu that had taken 3 days to plan. It looked like generosity. It was not generosity. It was an audition, and Audrey Hepburn did not yet know she was the one being tested. Voss worked the table the way he always worked rooms, gracious at the edges, controlling at the center. He complimented the director on his left. He laughed at the right moments. He made everyone feel that being near him was a privilege worth protecting. And then, carefully, he began. The first comment about Audrey was light enough to be dismissed as a joke, a remark about her dress being very European, delivered with a smile that invited the table to share in something she was not quite part of. A few people laughed softly. Audrey smiled and said nothing. She had heard that tone her entire career. She knew what it meant, and she knew, from long experience, that responding to it directly only gave it more oxygen. Gregory Peck heard it too. He was deep in a conversation with the director, William Wyler, beside him, but part of his attention had shifted the moment the first comment landed. He watched Audrey absorb it without expression and felt something tighten in his chest. Voss escalated gradually, the way a man does when he is testing how much the room will allow. A toast to Audrey's Oscar, ostensibly warm, structurally designed to diminish. He raised his glass and said, "To Audrey Hepburn, who proves that sometimes a pretty face is enough." Polite, uncomfortable laughter scattered across the table. Audrey held her champagne glass perfectly steady. She did not drink. Across the table, Peck set his glass down without touching it. Then Voss began speaking about Audrey's career as though she were not present. What roles suited her? What image she needed to protect? What kind of films were appropriate for a woman of her particular appeal? He addressed the table, not her, as if she were a subject being discussed rather than a person seated among them. Audrey listened for a long moment. Then, quietly and clearly, she said, "I appreciate the perspective, Mr. Voss, though I do intend to make those decisions myself." The table went very still. Voss smiled. He reached for the crystal pitcher, and 60 people watched him lift it. Gregory Peck pushed his chair back. The sound it made scraping across the marble floor was the only sound in the room. A single, clean note cutting through the silence like something deliberate, like a declaration. He did not rush. He placed his napkin on the table with the same care a man uses when he has made a decision he intends to live with. He straightened his jacket. Then he walked, slowly and without hesitation, around the length of the table to where Audrey Hepburn was sitting. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a folded white handkerchief. He held it out to her. Audrey looked up at him, her face still composed, water still running from her hair, and took it. Their eyes met for just a moment. Then Peck turned to face Richard Voss. The room did not breathe. Richard. Just his name, nothing attached to it yet, just the name, dropped into that silence like a stone into still water. Voss looked up from his glass. He was still half smiling, the smile of a man who believes the room belongs to him. "Gregory, sit down. This is a private matter." "No," Peck said. You did that in front of 60 people. That makes it public. She got above herself, Voss said, his voice carrying just enough amusement to be insulting. I was making a point. You poured water on a woman, Peck said, at a formal dinner, in front of her peers. What exactly was the point? The smile faded. You want to be very careful, Gregory. You know who I am. I know exactly who you are, Peck said. You are a man who just humiliated Audrey Hepburn to remind her that you have power over her. And I am telling you, in front of every person in this room, that you don't. Voss stood. The room shifted. You are going to regret this. Maybe, Peck said simply, but you are going to apologize to her, right now, publicly, the same way you humiliated her, in front of everyone. Voss's jaw tightened. He looked around the table, 60 faces, not one of them looking away. He had come to this dinner to demonstrate his power. Gregory Peck had just turned the demonstration against him. Every person in that room was watching. Every person in that room would remember. He had no exit that did not cost him something. Miss Hepburn, Voss said, the words pressed out through clenched teeth. That was inappropriate. Look at her, Peck said quietly, when you say it. Voss raised his eyes to Audrey. I apologize. The room exhaled. Then someone began to clap. One pair of hands, then two, then the entire table rising into a wave of applause that had nothing to do with the dinner and everything to do with what they had just witnessed. Audrey Hepburn sat in her wet dress and said with perfect composure, Thank you, Mr. Voss. Gregory Peck returned to his seat, picked up his fork, and said nothing further, as if the matter was settled, because it was. Nobody talked about it publicly. That was the first thing that happened after that dinner. A collective, unspoken agreement among 60 people that what they had witnessed would remain inside that room. This was Hollywood in 1954. You did not put your name on a story that involved Richard Harlan Voss unless you were prepared to pay for it. And the currency Voss dealt in was not money, it was opportunity. It was the phone call that never came, the door that closed quietly in the night, the project that stalled without explanation until the person attached to it understood that stalling was the message. The retaliation against Gregory Peck began within 3 weeks. It was invisible, as Voss's methods always were. A film Peck had been set to lead lost its studio backing without warning. A director who had been pursuing him for a lead role suddenly became unavailable. His agent called him on a Tuesday morning in April and said, without preamble, Richard Voss has made calls. Peck listened. He asked one question. How bad? His agent paused. Manageable, if you let it go. Peck thanked him and ended the call. He did not let it go. He simply waited. Audrey found out within the month. Word traveled in Hollywood the way water travels, through every available crack, quiet and unstoppable. She came to him on a studio lot on a Thursday afternoon, pulling him aside between stages, her voice low and tight with distress. Gregory, he is damaging your career because of me. Let me speak to him. I can find a way to fix this. Peck looked at her for a moment. You are not going to fix it, he said, because there is nothing to fix. I did what was right. The consequences are mine to carry. It isn't fair, she said. No, he agreed. But what he did to you wasn't fair either. And the only reason men like him keep doing what they do is because everyone around them decides that fairness is too expensive. He said it without anger, without performance, the way a person states something they have believed for a long time and never had the right moment to say aloud. Audrey was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question she had been holding since the night of the dinner. Why did you stand up? You could have looked away. Everyone else did. Peck considered it. My mother raised me to believe that watching someone be humiliated and doing nothing makes you part of the humiliation, he said. I couldn't be part of it. She looked at him with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life. Not gratitude exactly, something older and quieter than gratitude. Recognition, as if he had said something she had always believed but never heard spoken by anyone else. What happened between Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn 20 years later, in Paris in 1974, would finally reveal the full weight of what that night had meant to both of them. Paris in the autumn of 1974 was exactly the kind of city that makes the past feel close. The light came in at a low angle through tall windows, and the streets outside smelled of rain and bread and something older than either. Audrey Hepburn had lived in Europe for years by then, having stepped back from Hollywood almost entirely, choosing her sons, her garden, her quiet life in Switzerland over the machinery of the industry that had once tried to define her. She was 45 years old, and she wore it with the particular ease of a woman who had stopped performing for anyone's benefit but her own. Gregory Peck was 58. To Kill a Mockingbird had come and gone and cemented something in him that the public had always sensed but could now name precisely. He was at peace with himself in the way that very few people in Hollywood ever managed to become. Not because his life had been easy, but because he had made decisions he could live with, and had lived with them without apology. They had dinner at a small restaurant near the Seine, just the two of them, old friends catching up across a table lit by a single candle. They talked about their children, about Europe, about how much the industry had shifted since the 50s. The conversation was warm and easy and unhurried, the way conversations are between people who have known each other long enough to have stopped needing to impress one another. And then, in the middle of a comfortable silence, Audrey set down her wineglass and set it, quietly, without preamble, as if she had been carrying it for 20 years and had finally decided the moment was right. "I think about that dinner, more than I probably should." Peck looked at her. "I think about it too." "You know what I remember most?" she said. "Not Voss, not the water. I remember the sound of your chair, scraping across that marble floor, in all that silence." She paused. "It was the loudest thing I had ever heard." Peck said nothing. He watched her face in the candlelight. "That sound told me," Audrey continued, her voice steady and very quiet, "that there was at least one person in that room who believed I was worth standing up for. Do you understand how long I had waited to find that out? My whole career I had been gracious and accommodating and professionally invisible because that was the price of being allowed to work. I had never once allowed myself to believe that my dignity was something another person would risk anything to defend." She stopped. Her eyes were bright, but she did not look away. "You changed that. Not with what you said to Voss, with the sound of that chair." Peck reached across the table and took her hand. He held it for a moment before he spoke. "Every person in that room was waiting to find out the same thing," he said. "They just didn't know it yet." Audrey Hepburn lived 19 more years after that evening in Paris. She spent most of them giving, not performing, not accepting awards, not maintaining an image, giving. She became a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador in 1988 and traveled to some of the poorest and most forgotten places on earth: Ethiopia, Sudan, El Salvador, Bangladesh, Vietnam. Sitting with children in the dust and holding their hands and looking at them with the full weight of her attention, as if each one was the only person in the world. People who traveled with her during those years said the same thing consistently. She had no performance left in her. What you saw was exactly what was there. When journalists asked her why she gave so completely, why she pushed herself through exhaustion and illness to keep going back, she would smile in that particular way of hers, not the movie smile, the real one, and say simply, "Because someone once stood up for me, and I never forgot what that felt like." Gregory Peck died on June 12, 2003. Audrey had been gone for 10 years by then, taken by appendiceal cancer on January 20, 1993, quietly, at her home in Switzerland, surrounded by the people she loved. At her memorial, her son read a passage she had written about dignity, about what it means to be seen not as a prop in someone else's story, but as a human being worthy of defense. Richard Harlan Voss was forgotten by Hollywood before the decade was out. The system that had made him powerful collapsed under its own weight, as such systems always do. What remained was a woman's face, and the memory of one man pushing back his chair in a silent room. Some sounds travel further than anyone expects. Some sounds never stop. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe, because every week we tell the stories that Hollywood forgot to.